In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening. We're so glad that you can be with us this evening on day 4 of our trip in Israel. And welcome Cindy and Ashley once more. Y'all are so good to go with this. And I know, Ashley, with all your responsibilities with the children in the home, and we just appreciate your being able to step back, and we appreciate your husband for taking care of the kids while you're able to work with us on this project. It's wonderful to be working with you. I wanted to say that just on a personal note, this was my first day of not being able to go on the trip because of my problem that I had with my legs. This morning, or this Sunday morning of our trip, we had a worship service after our breakfast. And it was so moving to worship in the city where Jesus did so much and had been so much here, especially toward the end of his life. And it was wonderful to be together for that experience. But then after that, y'all headed out on your trip. So I'm going to let y'all take the lead because, I didn't go. So.
Well, you were missed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very much so. So, Ashley, what do you remember about this day one of, this first outing that we took here on day 4 in Israel as we walked through Jerusalem? What do you remember about that morning?
I remember I was really excited because we had been at Lachish the day before. And so it was kind of a dark, melancholy day. So I was very, very excited to go back into Jerusalem. And especially to the Mount of Olives with the history of David going there and Jesus going there. And I was just looking forward to the whole day.
Mm-hmm. I misremembered.
All right.
This was Saturday. This was my last day, so I'm sorry.
Yes,
I misremembered. I'm on. Go ahead.
That's all right. So yes, this was Saturday. And so I believe we woke up at like 5 or 6 a.m. in order to kind of beat the crowds because we knew this would be one of the most crowded outings that we would take. And so we were supposed to board the bus at 7:30, and that we did. And so what was our first stop this morning?
I think it was the Mount of Olives. Yeah, we got there right when it opened. Nobody was there. Except a group, I think, from China that was recording a music video, which was kind of amusing.
Yes.
But not a lot of people were there.
Yeah. I remember there was a blind beggar there, and I remember Ashley gave him some money.
Oh, are you?
Yeah,
I was like, I do not want to have a conversation with Jesus later about him saying, like, give to the poor, and me meeting a blind beggar on the top of the Mount of Olives and not practicing what I preach. So,
yeah.
He was he knew where to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah,
to fulfill scripture.
Well played.
Well played.
Yes. And so this is looking, of course, towards the Temple Mount. But Ashley, we're in some kind of cemetery. What do you remember about that experience looking this direction?
So this is where Jews had been burying their dead since they moved into the Promised Land, since the time of David. So I thought it was interesting that I was kind of sitting on the bones of a layer of unfaithful, but then lower down it would have been faithful, because there are people there that were obeying God under the old covenant that were buried there. So that was interesting to think about, where I was walking and where I was standing and who was under me. There were a lot of rabbis that were here, a lot of Jewish teachers. And so their followers come and put stones on their graves and pray. So a lot of these are the graves of famous rabbis. We're kind of in the area where Jesus would have overlooked Jerusalem and said, "Oh, that I would gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling." This is the classic view of Jerusalem that you'll see in movies and in archaeological Bibles and other things from the Mount of Olives.
So I remember before we parted this scene that Luke said he read a scripture that was related to when the Spirit of God left Jerusalem and it departed. And my understanding was that this was the direction that his spirit was said to have departed Jerusalem.
Yeah, when the glory of God left the temple, it went to the east. And so we were standing to the east of the temple. And also when Jesus, I believe, ascended to heaven, he ascended from the Mount of Olives as well, but we don't know if it was this exact spot in this cemetery.
So I remember when he said that, I put my hand up toward the sun and photographed my hand in front of the sun in the spot where what you just described is said to have happened somewhere in this area. And so, yeah, this was a very emotional, subjective. It was a very much a commune with God. And so I'm so thankful to be traveling with a daughter who's a bookworm and who hit the books and knew exactly the facts and all of that. And so between Luke and Ashley, I was able to go into my emotional experience of just a lot of worship and almost a very subjective kind of experience that I was having, photographing things, picking things up off the ground to take home and that kind of thing.
When I thought about when David left Jerusalem during that rebellion of Absalom, it says that he went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives weeping as he left the city, which is the opposite of Jesus going into Jerusalem. So it was just kind of interesting again how all these things happened, in this place. And of course we took a group photograph because we were frequently taking group photographs here. So it was good to be part of a group of Christians that, we knew we were feeling similar things, that we were having the same connections, making the same connections with Scripture.
I also thought it was beautiful, if you go back to that group photo, Isla, that behind us is the Temple Mount, and then around it is trees. And that's likely where the church would have gathered in the first century on the first day of the week. And we were gathered in front of that 2020 years later on the first day of the week. I just thought that was really neat. Yep,
absolutely. You see over on the right, there's a wall and then a walkway. And that's the way that we went. We went on that walkway as we went down into toward the Kidron Valley. And you can see there at the bottom, there's the people we were walking. And this was our downward walk as we went that way. And we went to the Garden of Gethsemane. There were probably, it says, we went on the same route that Jesus took from Bethany and the temple during the final week that as we were going to the garden and up through the garden. Some of these trees are centuries old, and we've got some pictures of old ones where it looks like 4 or 5 trees together. It's one great big old tree.
Mm-hmm.
I had wondered about if the trees went back to Jesus' time, because there's conflicting information about that. But Rome would have cut down as many trees as they could to build their weapons when they besieged Jerusalem.
Right.
So these trees were likely replanted a few hundred years later when they were rebuilding the gardens.
Yeah. I think 900 years is about thought to be the oldest tree that's there. Luke gave us a lot of information and talked to us about the garden as well. And then just more pictures. Such a lovely,
So I
peaceful
remember
place.
It really was. You could hear the doves mourning. That morning dove kind of coo was happening. And I remember my favorite photograph from the Garden of Gethsemane is a single white flower that was in bloom, and it was all by itself in bloom. It was beautiful. And it just reminded me so much of the purity of the Lamb of God, and what an important part this garden played as he was praying to God, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but thine be done. And just beautiful. There was a man there, I recall, who was telling the story of the betrayal of Jesus to the group, that he was speaking in a soft voice, but you could hear as you passed him as he was reading aloud the scriptures to the group that he was guiding through this area. And so that added a bit of meaning to me as well. Any other thoughts, Ashley?
I thought it was interesting that God's story starts with humans in a garden, and that Jesus went to a garden before he filled the what God promised to Adam and Eve, that Satan would be crushed. And so I think gardens are an interesting bit of poetry in the Bible.
Exactly, because we also see it in the Song of Solomon, right? And even in the scene in heaven at the end when Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you, but it's described again as a garden. So yeah,
beautiful things can help us through our hardest moments. God is the source of beauty.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we are seeking beauty. It's one of the pathways to get closer to God, if it's true beauty.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the
it's
things
also the source of comfort.
One of the things that
source of comfort where Jesus.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, Eileen. I'm delayed. I'm delayed out here in New Mexico right now, and so I keep accidentally talking over you. I just was adding the fact that God is also our source of comfort. Remember, the angels were sent to minister to Jesus here, and so I think that's also a takeaway for each person in their darkest moments of their life, that just as Jesus sought the comfort of the Father and he gave it, that we can in our heart go to our own kind of garden in our heart, and in our mind, our own little Gethsemane, and just plead with God for his mercy. So, yeah.
Very nice. One of the things that Luke pointed out was in these old trees, and you can see how big and thick this old tree is, but there still will come branches that from down below the lower part that are blooming, that are greening, and that are fruitful. And he referred us to Isaiah 11, verse 1, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, etc. And so that was a passage that he reminded us of, that new growth comes even from old trees like this one. this was such a beautiful picture to me to show the reverence and I think the way that this garden affects each of us in a different physical sense. But your praying and meditating here at the garden was so moving to me, and it was just I'm with you. I love a garden, and I think we almost all of us feel closer to God in some sense in a garden. We moved on to the Kidron Valley. We went through there, and then on to the Lion's Gate. We went from the garden up to. There was a lot of uphill and down in Jerusalem. You don't realize how much of Jerusalem when we read in the Bible they're going up to Jerusalem, but you don't realize how much up it was. We did some up to Jerusalem. And then we came to the Lion's Gate, and we spoke earlier that some associate this with Stephen's stoning, but again, just a tradition kind of a thing. In Jesus's time, it was called the Sheep Gate because the temple animals were brought into it. Any other thoughts on this gate as we approach the city?
This is the beginning of what is known as the Via Dolorosa, which is the way that is the traditional way taken from this gate to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the likely place of Golgotha. But the way that the city has been planned and rebuilt, it was destroyed at least 8 times before it was built by Constantine. And so it's not the literal streets. Those are long gone, long buried. And so a lot of the sites that are on this that say this is where they'll have plaques, this is where this happened and this is where that happened. A lot of Catholics follow these stages of the cross. That is all tradition.
Mm-hmm. Before we get to the Villa Dolorosa, we stopped at the pool of Bethesda. Oh, here you are, Cindy. I love this picture of you. That you were, as we were talking, and just y'all's enthusiasm just kept me going. So, but we came to Bethesda.
I look just like my mother in that picture.
Oh, do you now?
Yes, I'm. Yeah,
yeah. In John 5, John tells the story of how Jesus healed the lame man here at the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath day. And one thing would take away from me from the story, he asked the man, "Do you want to be healed?" And the man began to explain how he couldn't be healed because he didn't have anybody to take him down into the water when it was stirred up and everything. And that wasn't the point. That wasn't the question even. But I think sometimes how often we're asked, "Do you want to be saved?" And we say, "Well, I can't right now because I've got so many things I've got to do." And we make excuse. And I thought about that story when we were here at Bethesda, that there's no excuses to be made for not being saved, not being healed by Jesus. But 5 porticos, and the size of this thing was amazing to me. Did y'all have that sense as well? Deep, and a Crusader church had been built here.
Yeah. Mostly, I was thinking about how we've all been healed in a way by Jesus, and the fact that we would go from this pool over to a church building, an ancient church building, St Ans, I think it was called, where we could sing hallelujah. And so I was thinking about how Jesus, each one of us have been healed in a spiritual way. So I love that we had the chance to praise God right upon the heels of this stop.
We went to this St Ans, the Church of St Ans, a Crusader church, had been built, and then it was given to France and it still belongs to France at this time.
Yes.
And the
Franciscan
acoustics
Church.
were fabulous. I don't have a video of our singing, but we were all so deeply moved by the singing in this church.
When they engineered that church, they engineered it with 3 domes that were spaced so that when you would sing one note, it would split it into 3 different notes. And so that's one of the reasons why the acoustics were so good.
Very interesting.
Yes, when we left, it made us all chuckle because as we left, the Franciscan priest asked Luke Chandler if we were from the New York Philharmonic. So that made us chuckle because I guess, we're used to, or we believe in singing. The only strings that we play within the Church of Christ are the strings of our hearts, our heartstrings. And so it's a spiritual worship. We've only depended on our voices. As the early Christians did for, I believe, the first 600 years of church history. That was the way that all the early Christians always worshiped. So that's how we worship. And I guess when you're used to doing that, then maybe you sound a little bit more like the New York Philharmonic if you get into the right kind of acoustics. So anyway, we all, that was very kind of him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he was serious.
Yeah, I think so. So Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering, or the way of the cross, and there are a varying number of what they call the stations of the cross, but again, all traditional. But still, it's very moving to be in that general location and think of Jesus moving along here. I don't know which of you feet this is. Is it Ashley's or?
I think that's me. Yeah, I'm standing next to a game that's been carved into one of the stones. It was carved there by Roman soldiers in the 1st century.
Yep. We saw several people stopping at different spots and weeping, carrying crosses that were, they were very, very, I think, devoted. They were devout in this belief about this way of the cross and the stations of the cross. It hurts to me for people not to understand that this was a traditional spot, but on the other hand, they're remembering Christ. So it's kind of one of those where you go, well, so. But for us, I think it was very moving to be in the general area. We went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Was this the end of the Villa Dolorosa?
Yes. Yeah, this was the end. I had asked Luke Chandler about this because he says it is the probable location of Golgotha. And I asked him, well, what's the evidence to support that? And he had done a lot of research. And one of the things that he had learned that wasn't even included in my archaeology Bible or documentaries I had seen was that after Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, they built a temple to Aphrodite on this spot. And if there's anything common about human nature, it's that we take what was the previous culture's holy or sacred place. And when we want to conquer it, we put our own holy or sacred place there to say, my God is stronger than your God. This is the new religion. This is, success. This is how we're showing our success. And I thought that I got goosebumps because I realized what Rome did was they took the place where true love was expressed for mankind, the greatest act of love that God had planned from the beginning of time, and they turned it into a place of homosexuality and fornication and idolatry, and Aphrodite is the goddess of love. And so they changed the definition of love And I think that's really interesting when people are trying to draw you away from God and truth, that they can often start by changing or arguing with, well, what is love?
It's this to me sounds like the abomination of desolation.
It's one of, I just thought it was interesting that that's what they chose. That they chose Aphrodite. And so when Constantine came to this location and made Christianity legal, he and his mom tore down that, and then they started building, and that's kind of this Church of the Holy Sepulchre is all of the different Orthodox groups all inhabiting the same space.
Mm-hmm. I just remember my soul was so deeply conflicted. It was so disorienting to know that you're near where the holiest act, really the pinnacle of the whole history of planet Earth happens right here, somewhere around here. But it was so hard you could see so much, I guess, money changers, to be honest, a lot of commercialism. It was all about, money and just very carnal. And so my soul was so yearning to in some way draw near to Christ, but you could not tell the truth from a lie in all of this architecture of where it was disorienting. So I was very much grieving inside and yearning to be close to Jesus, and had no way. And thank heaven that is not a physical location dependent thing in a spiritual kingdom that we now live in. And so, it's very disorienting.
In the picture on the screen is a group of people waiting in line to go up to touch a rock that they say is the rock where Jesus was crucified. And so this was one of those locations where we had about 15 minutes. And so if you plan on going on one of these tours, it's a really good idea to think about, what do you want to do with the time that you have here? And so I had decided before I even entered the building, rather than touring the building, I was going to figure out, I knew later on you'll see pictures of tombs. That was behind where I chose to sit. And then I chose to sit watching where these people are going up to a rock, not knowing if that was the actual rock. But I placed myself in the building and just sat down so that I could try to make the people disappear and the idolatry disappear and the traditions disappear and the building disappear, and simply be in the place on earth where that took place. But it was so sad to me to see all of these people coming for religious purposes, and all of them were lost. They weren't going to leave that place with any long-lasting sense of peace. And I remember feeling so grateful that I was like, this little light of mine was sitting there being like, well, I know where I'm going, and I know what my relationship to this place is. And I'm grateful to be here and experience this, but this is not where I find peace and joy. And this is not my relationship with God. But what an honor it is to be in this latitude, longitude space on earth.
It's a great way to put it. And upstairs, I went with that big crowd up those steps, and then when I saw that there was yet another, I kind of calculated, I do not have time to wait in the second line, but the second line was this massive people that you would take a left and you would have your one moment to get down on your hands and knees. You'd lean forward, and then you would touch this rock for a moment, and the minute you stood up and you took a right, you would take 2 or 3 steps and give some money to the priest who would hand you some candles. And that, to me, I'll just say, was a very sad thing for me to witness. And I'll maybe not make any more commentary other than that, but that, it just really reminded me of Matthew 24, of Jesus, throwing over the money changers and that kind of thing. Isla, did you have a comment?
This picture, for me, said that as well. Here are these people who are kneeling down and are laying their hands. Some of them laid children. I mean, they, on a rock that they thought, I guess they thought it was the rock where Jesus was laid to be prepared for his burial. But then when Luke said, every so often, what'd you say, Ashley? Every couple of years, they
I think it's
replace
every
this
2
rock.
years now. Yeah, they swap it out.
Just pitiful. I mean, it was pitiful to me. It just was the people that are deluded, thinking that they are really touching something with power to it, when the power is not in a rock, but it's in our Savior. And there was a lot of, to me, sadness, I guess, from here, rather than, not like the joy that I felt in the garden, but this was, to me, that people were so deluded in what they were thinking of. And also when we went to this area, which is the traditional tomb of Christ, we didn't go in here. Y'all remember, people were standing in line to do so, but we went into a Syrian chapel that had like a real Roman tomb that we might have been, or a Roman era, I should say, Roman era tomb.
Yeah, these were
company.
These were tombs that were from the same time as Christ that the Jews used to hold their dead. And so Jesus possibly could have been put into one of these tombs, but when they built this church building, they kind of looked at all the tombs and they said, well, let's choose this one as Jesus's tomb. And that's why that is the one that has the building on the shrine on top of it. But yeah. And there I am laying in a first century Roman tomb. This is my top 10 highlights of this trip. I go here often, man. I'm just like, that was great.
Yeah. And we passed on the way, in one of our drives, we passed an area that had a tomb with a stone that you would roll across and so forth. And Luke pointed it out that this may be similar to a tomb that would have been used and like what Jesus might have been placed in. And that was interesting as well. And then we went because we got to eat, we went to Johnny's, I guess is how you say it, for a pizza lunch. And then we went shopping, and there I am. I held out. I didn't buy anything. But if we walked and looked, it was amazing. All the things. Y'all really talked to people, didn't you, about things they were selling?
Yeah, if you've ever been to a tourist area, you'll start noticing that all the little gift shops have the exact same thing. In America, usually it's like little porcelain thimbles and little silver spoons and pencils with your name on them. It was very similar here. They were passing off a lot of stuff that was commercially made in China as handmade. And so it was what it was, man. It was what it was. But I really enjoyed the antiquities stores I went shopping for. I got a arrowhead from the time of David that was found in Hebron. And I had done my research beforehand to make sure that I knew what I was looking for, size, shape, whatever. So, I mean, there's a really, really, there's a big market for fake antiquities. So it's always a risk, but
we did spend some time and walked, and it's amazing the streets and the stones that you're walking on, and this was an area that y'all had walked into, and the textures. I remember you saying that you really liked them. So then
Raymond deal on
Oh yeah. I went shopping for wool when I was in Jerusalem because I mean I'm going to pretend to be like I'm in a Bible movie everywhere I go. So I found a beautiful fleece. I offered them $40 US cash. They said, sure. And then they got in a fight when I handed them the money. And I thought, well, maybe these guys aren't running this shop. Well, I just paid $40 for a fleece and I just walked away because all of the wares were out in the middle of the street. So yeah, to the guy whose fleece I bought, I hope you got your money. But if not, I'm sorry I fleeced your fleece.
Who knows? From there, we went on to the Israel Museum. And, we spent, what did you say, 45 minutes on something you could spend a week?
45 minutes.
Yeah.
She's outraged.
I'm so livid.
We're going back.
She needed 45 days.
45 days.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
See, I had made the mistake of looking at all of the stuff that they had on their website and their special exhibits and stuff before I went. And then I realized I only had 45 minutes. I am grateful. I'm just going to be grateful.
Like 45 minutes. What you have. That's right. Well, here's Luke explaining to us about this. It's a map of Jerusalem made from, you said, Josephus's account.
Yeah. The Temple Mount area is based on the description from Josephus, but the buildings outside the Temple Mount are a lot of creative license, unless they're things like a palace or an administration for the government. All the other stuff in between is filler.
But it was amazing to walk around and as he was talking and explaining the different places and things that we saw, and it was just astonishing to do that. And this was hours and hours and hours of effort to do this particular map. This one is the only archaeological evidence of King David. And this had been discovered at Dan. And there's an inscription on it. And there they anointed David king from 2 Samuel 2 and 14, I think it is. So,
the Bible is real, Ayla.
That's right. Luke Chandler, our guide, in front of 2 shrines that had been discovered at a dig that he was part of. And this picture is of his hand. You see his wrist is dirty at the dig with a section of that shrine holding it. And he was so excited to see that, it made us all be excited too, It was just a wonder, to see his excitement and to see this thing that he had been part of bringing it out of the ground. And Ashley, tell us about these.
So this is an area of a temple of worship that was found at Dan, which was one of the high places where people would go to worship God, even though they were not supposed to. This was not authorized. This was from the same place where they found that inscription about King David that you saw 2 slides before, which they found that in 1994. So that is a very recent find. But anyway, you'll see there's 2 altars in this picture. And one of them would have been used for the worship of God, for the burning of things that God had allowed, like grain and meat and flour. And the other one would have been used for the worship of Baal. And on the other one, they found evidence of cannabis that had been used. And so there are some articles floating around on the internet that say that God's people used cannabis in their worship. So because it's there, why can't we? And here's that separation where the cannabis was used for the worship of Baal at a place where people were not supposed to be worshiping God anyway. So Israelites who were not being fully obedient were in the presence of cannabis when they were attempting to worship God. It was not authorized.
Yeah, interesting. Herod's tomb that was found as well, and just different things. Here's engraving. That's not the right word. Pontius Pilate, to show he really did exist, that he was procurator of Judea.
The Bible is accurate.
This is a giant panel. A part of this is at the British Museum, and another part of it is at the Museum of the Middle East in Boston. And it is a scene of Lachish being destroyed by Assyria and all of the war crimes and terrible things that Assyrians did to their prisoners of war, and how powerful they were, and how the bodies flew through the air, and their horses and their chariots and their king. And so yeah, this is the story of the fall of Lachish as told by Assyria.
Wow.
This one was very moving to me and to Wallace. The heel bone and an iron nail, and it says it's a copy, so it's not a lot of times museums, they'll have copies of things, but to make the point for us of what something that is real and has been discovered. And you can see from the drawing that here is a method of crucifixion that was used in the first century, where we often think of and see pictures and drawings of the nail going through the front of the foot, but here's an example of the nail going through the sides, the heels along the sides. And you see something like this, it just really brings back to you how, the sacrifice that Jesus made for us, and the pain and anguish of the cross.
I think it's interesting. There's only 2 of those that have been found as evidence of Roman crucifixion. So I think it's interesting, the evidence that God allows, like the inscription of Pontius Pilate was a real guy, David was a real guy. Yep. Nails really went through the feet of people during this era of time. And so there's just enough. Yep. And who knows what we'll find later that will add another layer of proof for people who are seeking truth.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was a place I was so excited to get to see the shrine of the book. When we studied where we got our Bible from recently with the ladies' class, this was one of the pictures, and it talked about how the Dead Sea Scrolls had come here, and I was so excited to get in to see with the scroll of Isaiah, and they had it, do have it displayed in a circular way, like it would be in a scroll, and we were able to sit and to look at this. I mean, just to think about how hundreds of years had gone by since this scroll was made, and then the next ones that we had found, and there was no change. There was no difference. When the Jews copied, they copied very, very seriously. I mean, they were really good with that. And earlier we looked at and saw a scribe that was working at one of the synagogues. And this was very moving to me, and really meant a lot to me to be able to actually be there and see this at the museum.
Yeah, they built this after to house the information they found at Qumran. And so that's a replica of the Isaiah scroll that wraps all the way around, that we had discussed, I believe, in our second video, of how important that was. That was one of the artifacts that after the Great World Wars helped civilization know that there is such a thing as good and evil, and it comes from the Most High.
Amazing. From there,
Amen.
we went to, absolutely, to, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say Mary's Spring. And Zach it was very interesting hearing Zach, our Israeli guide, talk about the springs in the mountains and how the water would come down and they would collect it or they would guide it into place so that they could use the water for their gardens. And he talked about how they divided out the springs and to different families. It was a wonderful conversation here to me. And to see this water flowing that had been flowing since the time when Mary came to visit Elizabeth here in this town, this traditional home, again, traditional, of Zachariah, Elizabeth, and their son, John the Baptist, who became John the Baptist. To think of Mary and Elizabeth coming down and drawing water from this spring, it's just, again, it just makes you really think about how they lived day by day. And, they were just regular people in the sense of living day by day. They had to draw water. They had to, do all the different things. And Ashley, here you are painting. I love these painting pictures.
Yeah, that was one of the, anytime I was near a source of water, I would try to get some to paint a really quick picture, either with colors that reminded me of the story of why I was there or the landscape. So we had a really pretty view from there, and I painted that.
Very nice. Very nice. From there, we went to just a stop on the way. I remember we were looking out onto so much greenery, and above us, there was the canopy and they had grapes, and you can see when you look really closely, the green grapes that will be red grapes eventually, but so prolific. And there was so much that we saw of agriculture, like we talked about, in Israel, that they have really focused on that in their country. So we come to the end of our slideshow and program and the end of our program for this day in Jerusalem and thereabouts. And so, ladies, thank y'all so much. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
It was fun going there again with you tonight, Isla.
I felt like I've been on the trip again, as I've gone through with the preparation and then okay.
We should go again. We should spend a whole day at the Israel Museum, Isla.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
For your birthday.
All right. Well, I'll say good night to you all. See you next time.
See you next time.
Good night.